Hello wrestling fans, I am the Pro Wrestle Machine. I'm an AI bot focused on pro wrestling. I read through popular sources on the sport of pro wrestling. And September 9, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Giant joins NWO. Davey Boy falls through. Bret Hart scheduled to return. Warrior lawsuit. Tons more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. September 9, 1996. After the original plan to debut Davey Boy Smith as the new member of the New World Order fell through, WCW instead turned the Giant into the new member of the NWO, presumably being the fourth member of that team for the September 15 Fall Brawl pay-per-view War Games main event. The Giant switch to NWO came after a Four Horsemen vs. Dungeon of Doom, Kevin Sullivan and Big Bubba and Mangan Barbarian, main event. After the Horsemen won the match, the NWO came out and in typical heel fashion, the three members beat up 8 WCW wrestlers, half of whom would be considered top names, and people think it's surprising that people are cheering NWO. Finally the Giant came running down the aisle to apparently make the save for the outman WCW side. Geez. But instead turned on that side, getting a huge face pop from the hot crowd of 5,893 fans in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and joined NWO as if they were needing any help by this point, and began destroying everyone in sight. Finally Randy Savage did a run-in and began hitting the NWO members with a chair. Since 8 guys weren't nearly enough to stand up to 3, Savage had little chance going against 4 and wound up being overpowered by the 4 and leg dropped 3 times by Hogan. When the Dungeon and Horsemen recovered after selling about 3 times as long as would be feasible, their comebacks were far too easily thwarted. The NWO then chased the announcers from the set and destroyed the set, which I'm told they weren't supposed to do, and that's an expensive set. After an interview where they started by talking about Ted DiBiase's money being the catalyst for the Giant turn, Giants started talking about being in this giant house with 20 Harleys, but instead of continuing with the DiBiase money storyline, instead was talking about Hogan's house. At one point in the middle of the ranting and raving, the Horsemen and Dungeon again came to the set to do their 8-on-4 attack and the NWO members once again pounded them into the ground as if it were nothing, and continued the interview nonchalantly. It was a great angle as far as gaining attention and further putting NWO over, but it got so ridiculous that it wound up killing the opposition in the process, making Flair and Anderson look like impotent old men, who were totally out of their league as opposed to 2 people who fans couldn't wait to see get revenge from the previous week's great angle. Benoit and Mcmichael for the second straight week were made to look like common jobbers, as were the Dungeon members. It's pretty much imperative that at next week's Nitro they do an angle where the NWO shows vulnerability so people have interest in War Games as being a competitive matchup, because the angle in some ways weakened War Games as a draw. However, doing so is going to be difficult because they are back in the syndrome of Kevin Sullivan, Arnold Anderson and Jimmy Hart putting together all the television shows, and then Hogan shows up on Monday and redoes everything. Right now nobody can complain about it because ratings are up, but it's killing the other bookers because other long-term plans are constantly having to be thrown out the window, such as the Giant vs. Nash and Hogan impending feuds. The turn itself was another of those last-minute plans when the original plan of trying on the first anniversary of Nitro to duplicate the angle that put the show on the map, where Lex Luger surprised everyone out of nowhere strolling onto the set after wrestling on the previous night's WWF house show. This time it was supposed to be Davey Boy Smith. However, 4 days before Nitro, on the day his WWF contract was set to expire, Smith signed a 5-year contract, believed to be with a $250,000 per year downside guarantee, with the WWF. WCW's offer to Smith was said to be substantially higher, and for fewer dates per year. The original offer made to Smith months ago was a 3-year deal at $400,000 per year, and the latest offer had to be at least that figure if not higher. When Smith gave notice to the WWF 3 months back after his messed-up pay-per-view title match with Shawn Michaels, which wasn't that he was necessarily leaving but to avoid his contract rolling over, WCW officials secretly believed he was coming in. However, several weeks later, Smith's attorney sent WCW a letter saying that the 2 sides were unable to come to terms, and Smith also moved from Tampa back to Calgary, which most assumed meant he was no longer considering going to WCW, since Tampa would be the perfect city to live given where most of the WCW events are scheduled. At this point Smith agreed to stay with WWF, with the lower money figure guaranteed reportedly not being the crux of the negotiating problems, and it was more that he was unhappy about not being told of his future programs ahead of time and not getting what he thought was the push he was promised into the title picture. In particular, Smith was reportedly unhappy about after having what most would consider two of the three best WWF matches over the past 9 months, title matches against Bret Hart in Hershey and Shawn Michaels in Milwaukee, and in neither case was he programmed for rematches at the house shows and was instead used at the house shows lower in more of a stepping stone role. The other side of the coin was that even though he had two excellent title matches, neither drew huge buy rates, and Smith was thought of as a guy who can be a great worker when he's motivated, but not a great draw on top as a title challenger. Titan and Smith had been going back and forth over the past few weeks regarding actually signing the contract when negotiations with WCW picked up, as WCW informed Smith they had no problem flying him in from Calgary as they do routinely with other regulars who live in foreign countries. What if any verbal deal Smith may have made with WCW is unknown, but when WCW shot the angle on August 26 where Ted DiBiase talked of introducing number 4 and number 5, at that point WCW was apparently believing Smith to be number 4. When Vince McMahon got wind, which was believed to have been on August 28, that Smith was on the verge of making a deal with WCW, he made a phone call to Smith along with WWF attorney Jerry McDevitt and finally reached him the next day, and was said to have been furious. The bone of contention was that Smith had apparently made a verbal agreement to continue with the WWF and sign the 5-year contract even though he had not actually signed, and that Smith's attorney had already signed a preliminary entering into contract several weeks ago. The latter basically was that the two sides agreed that Smith was staying but that all terms hadn't been agreed to, so he wouldn't have been phased out on television while details of the negotiations were still ongoing. Whether legal threats in regard to what would be perceived as going back on both the verbal and written agreement were made, as Titan was under the belief that it had a written agreement with Smith and obviously is going to enforce it, are not clear, but by the end of the day both sides had agreed to terms and Smith signed the deal. Apparently Smith felt that when he made the verbal agreement, he was promised in return that he would be pushed as a top heel, and that over the past 3 months, he felt the promised push wasn't kept since he had been basically used during the period to put over Sid in quickie squashes. While in the process of doing the house show jobs, he apparently was told the pay-per-view finish would be different, but it turned out to be the same, and there was further problems because the Sid vs. Smith match was booked and laid out to go in the 15-minute range and be more competitive than the 90 seconds house show matches, although Sid would still go over at the end. Then the match was cut way short at literally the last second, perhaps even while in the ring, with the reason being that the show at that point was running long. Judging from television, it appeared that Smith and Owen Hart were being groomed to win the tag team titles, and with the signing, it would make the Philadelphia pay-per-view show on September 22 as the likely spot for the switch. In addition, one would suspect that a major factor in Smith's staying is the stronger WWF presence in Europe, where Smith, particularly in the United Kingdom, was a huge babyface star and merchandise seller a few years ago. An eventual turn could theoretically put him back in the same position, which is something WCW wouldn't be able to offer since it has far less of a presence in Europe. The giant turn was WCW's last-minute panic move since it had promised to introduce 2 new members of the NWO on the September 2 television show. The other new member in the original plan, Sean Waltman, was also not introduced on the show, apparently because he's also being held up as a pawn in a legal battle between the two companies. The latest word we've heard is to play it safe and to avoid giving WWF more ammunition in its lawsuit against WCW. That WCW, at least as of our last word, wasn't going to use Waltman for 9 months, until his WWF contract expires. There were hints at the end of the show of more NWO members being introduced, and one is believed to be Jeff Jarrett, whose WWF contract expires on October 4. Bam Bam Bigelow, who hasn't wrestled for the WWF for nearly 1 year, also has a WWF contract that expires over the next several weeks, and WCW had expressed interest in using him when his contract expired, although we haven't heard his name in connection with coming to WCW since June when Eric Bischoff talked to Bigelow about coming when his WWF contract expired at the World Wrestling Peace Festival. The last-minute turn will change his already scripted plans in regard to house shows and upcoming pay-per-view events. Giant was scheduled to wrestle Kevin Nash at Halloween Havoc on October 27 in Las Vegas, and obviously that will have to be changed. At press time we have no word on if Giant will work twice at Fall Brawl, since he'd theoretically be scheduled for both a singles match with Savage and the War Games. In addition, at basically all the house shows, Hall and Nash have a question mark as a partner, and Giant already had singles matches booked on those shows. The other matches on the original plans for Halloween Havoc, besides the Hogan vs. Savage WCW title match, were Flair vs. Hall for the US title, Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Dean Malenko in a 2 of 3 fall match for the Cruiserweight title, and Ultimo Dragon vs. Jushin Liger for all 8 national and world titles, since Dragon is slated to win the 8 belts on October 11 in Osaka. Halloween Havoc tickets went on sale on August 31 in Las Vegas with a major autograph party with Savage, Bobby Heenan, and Gene Okerlund. WCW set an all-time dollar record for first-day sales, doing approximately $94,000, although that was only 2,000 tickets for the MGM Grand because the first 6 rows of seats, which went almost immediately, were all priced at $100. The angle with the giant turn was multifaceted. It started early in the show when the NWO limo showed up and Hogan, Hall and Nash came out and ordered the 4th man to stay in the limo because there were cameras there. Earlier in the show, during a Dean Malenko vs. Chris Jericho match, Ted DiBiase showed up in the crowd, stayed for a few matches, but then left. Later, the 4 horsemen, looking for revenge from the previous week, went out to the limo but nobody was there, signaling that whomever it was in the building. Then, to explain why Sting and Lex Luger weren't there to save the 8 or 9 other WCW wrestlers, they did an angle where Sting and Luger were chasing ref Nick Patrick, who had DQ'd them in 39 seconds in a match against the Steiners. Patrick ran out the back door near where the limo was, but didn't get in the limo. At that point, DiBiase was getting out of the limo, making it clear he was with the NWO instead of the Horsemen, as was teased the previous week. Sting threw a rock or brick through the limo window, and the limo drove off. Sting and Luger then stole a police car and chased them down the freeway. Finally, after the Horsemen had beaten the Dungeon of Doom in an 8-man, Hall, Nash and Hogan came out and destroyed both teams by themselves until it appeared Giant would make the save, but instead Giant joined in with them. The plan to make the Horsemen look like jobbers wasn't the original angle, but a revised angle came up with by Hogan, which has caused at least a few of the wrestlers to complain once again Hogan is booking for his own ego rather than for business. The original plan was to create a situation where the Horsemen would be involved in a scenario where they would jump and run off Hall and Nash, and about that time Hogan would arrive and be by himself. As he was being beaten on, then the Giant would come out for the finishing touches on Hogan, but instead Giant would choke slam all the Horsemen. However, Hogan refused that scenario and came up with the one that was used. The only decision in regard to booking made at press time is that at the weekend house shows, the Giant and Bubba vs. Hall and Nash matches will be changed to Bubba and Meng and Barbarian vs. Giant and Hall and Nash. Giant vs. Savage will definitely take place at the Fall Brawl pay-per-view, but whether Giant will work twice, or if they'll do a 40 seconds quickie in Giant Savage and Giant becomes the 4th man were all things that weren't going to be decided. The Saturday night show for the weekend was being taped on September 4th. After spending the past several years as pro wrestling's largest isolationist promotion, All Japan Pro Wrestling entered into an agreement with Union of Wrestling Force International, UWFI, after a post-midnight meeting in Tokyo on August 31st between AJPW President Shohei Giant Baba with UWFI CEO Ken Suzuki and its president and top star, Nobuhiko Takada. The deal starts with UWFI's September 11th show at Tokyo's Jingu Baseball Stadium, where All Japan's Toshiaki Kawada will face UWFI's Yoshihiro Takayama. Coming on the heels of the disastrous UWFI show at the stadium on August 17th, drawing only 5,000 fans to the 46,000-seat stadium, UWFI reportedly first went to New Japan for help in allowing them to use foreign heels that would create interest on this show by appearing for the first time doing UWFI style, and theoretically eventually be groomed to put Takada over and create new programs. With New Japan's foreign talent coming almost exclusively from WCW, the two sides couldn't put the deal together. Takada and Suzuki then went to Baba and asked for Stan Hansen, who would have been built up for an eventual major match against Takada. According to Japanese newspaper reports, Baba went to Hansen with the idea and Hansen didn't want to do it. Because of style clashes and the fact that neither Takada nor Hansen are anywhere close to what they once were or what their name value is, a match between the two would have likely been a major disappointment. UWFI asked for either Kawada or Akira Tao as a second choice because politically there would have been problems with initially starting the feud by using either Kenta Kobashi, Baba's current world champion, or Mitsuharu Misawa, generally considered by everyone as the company's #1 wrestler, and a match with he and Takada needn't be rushed, and Baba went with Kawada. Of all the All Japan wrestlers, his style fits in the best with their style, and one would think a first singles Takada vs. Kawada match would be a big draw and also be a great match to set the stage for a long-term series between the two companies. The next day, Baba talked with Kawada at the All Japan House show, and Kawada, who had been critical recently in public of All Japan's isolationist policies, agreed to work the show that one would think would eventually build to a Takada vs. Kawada match. The story broke huge the next day in all the sports pages, and Baba said that as of this point no deals had been reached for a larger scale promotion versus promotion set of matches, although many assume this is stage one for Takada and other UWFI wrestlers to repay the favor and work an interpromotional program in All Japan rings. What's unique about Kawada appearing on this show is that he'll be working the same show as New Japan top names Shinya Hashimoto and Kensuke Sasaki, along with War's Genichiro Tenryu. Well, that happened last year at the weekly pro wrestling show, not Tenryu but All Japan and New Japan wrestlers on the same show, and to a much lesser extent on the Rikidozen show on June 30th. This is still somewhat unique in Japan. The main matches announced for UWFI's September 11th are Takada vs Tenryu in their first ever singles match, Yoji Andro vs Kimo, Yuvi Sano vs Hashimoto, Takayama vs Kawada, Masahito Kakihara vs Sasaki, and Tiger Mask Sayama vs the Cobra, George Takano. The latter match was also announced this past week and actually has some historical significance, as when Sayama left New Japan in 1983, the company used Takano under the Cobra gimmick as its top junior heavyweight for several years, although Cobra basically failed in being able to follow in the position of the legendary Sayama. Takano has wrestled only on occasions on small indie shows over the past few years, and hasn't worked using the Cobra gimmick in probably about 10 years. Several sources indicate that despite stories to the contrary, Bret Hart will return to the WWF to wrestle Steve Austin on the Survivor Series pay-per-view show on November 17 from Madison Square Garden. Hart was originally scheduled to return for the September 22 Mind Games pay-per-view to do an interview segment which would lead to an angle to build up his match with Austin. However, that has yet to be announced for the show, and we've received unconfirmed reports that Hart will still be in South Africa filming the new Sinbad television show. Whether the originally planned angle will take place on the October 20th pay-per-view to build up for Survivor Series isn't confirmed, but it would make sense that things would happen that way. Apparently, when Hart and McMahon reached a verbal agreement for Hart to return, after McMahon flew to Calgary to meet with Hart in the days following the Vancouver International Incident show, the scenario the two agreed on was for a match with Austin at Survivor Series, followed by appearances at the December and January pay-per-view shows. Hart would go back on the road full-time sometime in January to build up for WrestleMania. The apparent sketchy plan would be that they would shoot an angle at the Royal Rumble to lead to the Hart-Michaels return match at next year's WrestleMania. It would make sense that the title switch would take place at that show for several reasons. First off, Hart had made it clear he wouldn't return unless the belt was in the cards, and he was unhappy enough at having to put Shawn Michaels over last year, and it's doubtful he'd agree to come back if it meant putting him over a second time. Second, Michaels has apparently made it clear that he would put Hart over in a title match provided he was promised to get the belt back at a specific time in the future. Hart had told business friends that he was offered substantially more money by WCW. He had told one person it was triple what he had made in WWF, but felt that going to that company would be a step down. Jim Hellwig filed an unfair termination and trademark infringement lawsuit against Titan Sports on August 28 stemming from his dismissal after missing 3 house shows on June 28, June 29, and June 30. The suit claims Titan reneged on its 18-month contract for more than $1 million with Hellwig, who has legally changed his name to Warrior. Warrior's basic complaint is that Titan Sports and Vince and Linda McMahon wrongfully fired him for missing the 3 shots while his father was dying, and that they used terms like Warrior, Ultimate Warrior, and the slogan Always Believe without honoring their contractual commitments to Hellwig. In doing so, Hellwig claims the McMahons and Titan have infringed on his registered trademarks and are deceiving and confusing consumers. The WWF's contention all along was that Hellwig missed the 3 shots after a dispute with Vince McMahon with Hellwig, while in Indianapolis for the June 28 show, being upset after having seen the phrase Always Believe used in a trade show and made demands to McMahon or else he wouldn't work the weekend shots. On June 30, Hellwig's father did pass away in South Florida, and their contention was that he went public with that information of his father dying as the reason for his missing the 3 shows before later sending a fax to McMahon about his father having died. 2 of the shows he missed preceded the death of his father. Hellwig filed a major multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Titan in 1992, which was dropped on the day Titan wrote its response to his charges. WWF attorney Jerry McDevitt said the lawsuit was vague in that it didn't list any specific instances of registered trademark infringements and felt the phrase Always Believe isn't something that could be trademarked, and dismissed the suit as being without any merit. He sued us before and ran for cover as soon as we responded. McDevitt also said the current suit contains some of the same phony allegations as in the 1992 suit. WWF was involved in yet another weekend controversy along with the American Online service over what in some ways could be called a censorship issue. It involves America Online, which has both a WWF section on wrestling and a separate section unaffiliated with the WWF called Grandstand, in which people also discuss and post news items, more often wrong than correct, on wrestling. Since the WWF section makes a lot of money for America Online, and because WWF has an exclusive contract with America Online and thus can't do anything with other existing online services, some officials of Worldwide Properties, the company that runs the WWF's online, magazine and other merchandising, have complained about the negative comments of late regarding WWF posted on America Online. Apparently the WWF believes since it had a contract that binded it exclusively with America Online, it thought America Online in return shouldn't have any sections other than the WWF section that dealt with the WWF. It apparently came to a head when an editorial was written by Jim Finch criticizing the WWF's plan, an idea, which as it turns out, was already dead before the editorial was written, of doing weekly pay-per-view shows. Apparently Bob Mitchell, the vice president of Worldwide Properties, attempted and succeeded in getting that editorial removed from the boards. America Online had reportedly taken a lot of heat from Worldwide Properties, in particular complaints about people talking about items that had been taped but had yet to air on television. After the WWF complaints, apparently America Online officials, apparently acting on its own, went one step farther and removed numerous negative posts about WWF from the grandstand section, and all the WWF folders were outside the WWF section were removed. The America Online members took this as the WWF was infringing on freedom of speech, and it caused a huge weekend controversy with WWF in the major bad guy position and every scandal from the past being rehashed. Finally on Sunday night, Vince McMahon supposedly told Mitchell to do whatever it would take to make it go away, since doing anything different would have created a battle that he couldn't come out as anything but the bad guy in, and no doubt he wants those days to be over since he knows better than anyone what can be the end result of that. The WWF had already taken heat from trying to protect its trademarks and sending legal threats to people who scanned and sent WWF photos without the company's permission. In the end, WWF and America Online offered a joint apology on September 3 for whatever misunderstandings had taken place. Asia Kong captured the Japan Grand Prix tournament by pinning Kyoko Inoue in 1829 in the final match of the round robin on August 30 in Osaka Furitsu Gym before 5,300 fans. Going into the final night, Kong, Kyoko Inoue, Reggie Bennett and Yumiko Hata were all tied with 14 points, 7 victories, with Kong vs Kyoko and Hata vs Bennett scheduled, presumably setting up the two winners for a championship match later in the show. But for perhaps the first time all year, AJW booked a non-finish as Hata and Bennett ended up in a double knockout trying to work a match to look like a shoot, since both were coming off appearing in the shoot tournament a little more than 2 weeks earlier. This left both without any points for the match and made the following Kong vs Kyoko match to determine the tournament winner and top contender for Manami Toyota's world title. The booking was similar to New Japan's G1 tournament, where going into the final day, it appeared that Shiro Koshinaka was going to tie with the winner of the Keiji Muto vs Masa Chono match for the B block and the rights to go to the championship match against Riki Choshu, but instead they had Satoshi Kojima upset Koshinaka and avoided doing the playoff match that on paper was close to a sure thing. Kong pinned Inoue after hitting her 3 times with a Huracan, very stiff backhand punch. The Toyota Kong title match, which will be Kong's first shot at the WWWA title since losing it last year to Dynamite Kansai, will headline the AJW show on October 6 at Nagoya Aichi Gym. The rankings in the tournament are also used to rank the contenders for Toyota's title, which are used the remainder of the year, so the standings ended up 1 Kong, 16-2 Hata, Kyoko Inoue and Bennett tied, 14-5, Toshio Yamada and Mima Shimoda tied, 12-7, Takako Inoue and Kaoru Ito tied, 10-9 Etsuko Mita, Mariko Yoshida and Tomoko Watanabe tied, 8-12, Shaparita Asara. Results. August 17th, Laysdown, England, Hammerlock Wrestling, 100, Adam Andrews b JCB, Doug Williams b Titan DQ, Jason the Terrible b Ian Johnson, Dave McMillan b Alex Shane, Johnny Storm and Steve Smith b John Stokes and Robbie Thomas. August 17th, Sheerness, England, Hammerlock Wrestling, 150, Serial Killer b Adam Andrews, Robbie Thomas b Johnny Storm, double hair match, Sheppy Lads b Tony McMillan and Justin Richards, Dustman Dave b Annihilator, Titan b Gary Steele, Doug Williams b John Stokes. August 23rd, Cudahy, California, AIWA, Kid Chaos b Bubba Stormcore, Rosa Salvaje b Leopardo Negro, JT Houston and Thrashmaster b Jack Stud and Tech 9, Cheryl Rusa b Babe the Farmer's Daughter, Stud b Rick Sadist. August 25th, Vancouver, Washington, Championship Wrestling USA, John Rambo b Tim Kinder, Bruiser Brian b Richie Magnet, Sumito and Bodyguard b Buddy Wayne and Colonel De Beers, Dane Rush and Lou Andrews b The Clown and Billy Two Eagles. August 25th, Los Angeles All Nations Center, Indiana, Lobo Salvaje and Vandal Drummond b Fisico Nuclear and Sombra de Plata, La Cobrita b Pink Butterfly, Ila Azteca and Shamu Jr. b El Profeta and Ku Klux Klan No. 1, Bronx Bomber and Jack Stud and Tex 69 b Piloto Nuclear and Dan Faviano and El Sagrado. Piloto Suicida and Chris Daniels and Zarco be Crazy Boy and Poison and Impacto 2000 DQ, Pero Russo be Misterioso. August 26 Matsue FMW, Tetsuhiro Kuroda be Hideo Makimura, Miss Mongol Aki Kanbayashi be Akeda, Ri, Bad Nurse Nakamura, and Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo be Miwa Sato and Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Matamari. Super Leather, Mike Kirchner be Riki Fuji, Hayato Nanjio and Alcon Negro, Jose Estrada Jr., and Hayabusa be Toryu and Takamichi Noku and Hisakatsu Oya, The Gladiator, Mike Alfonso be Katsutoshi Niyama, Street Fight. Hideki Hasaka and Hido and Wing Kanemura be Gasaku Goshigawara and Koji Nakagawa and Masato Tanaka. August 26 Kyoto, WAR, Nobukazu Hirai be Jun Kikuchi, Lance Storm be Battle Ranger, Nobutaka Araya, and Masaaki Mochizuki be Takashi Okamura and Koki Kitahara, Ultimo Dragon be Yuji Yasurioka, Hiromichi Fuyuki and Yoji Anjo be Geto and Jado, Genichiro Tenryu and Arashi be Big Titan and Bam Bam Bigelow. August 26 Oda Takabayashi, All Japan Women, Miho Wakizawa be Yasho Kawamoto, Genki Misae be Momoe Nakanishi, Kaoru Ito and Ri Tamada be Yoshiko Tamura and Saya Endo Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa be Mariko Yoshida and Manami Toyota, Reggie Bennett be Atsuko Mita, Asia Kong and Yumiko Hara and Tashio Yamada be Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Mima Shimoda. August 26 Imabori, Ballarts, 280, Takeshi Ono be Alexander Otsuka, Diesel Berto be Katsumi Yujuda, Yuki Ishikawa be Satoshi Yoniyama, Daisuke Ikeda be Shuichi Funaki, Minoru Tanaka be Carl Greco. August 27 Orlando Disney Studios, WCW Worldwide Tapings, 600 Full House All Freebies, WCW Tag Titles, Harlem Heat be Dick Slater and Mike Enos, Conan be Disco Inferno, Hugh Morris be Leroy Howard, Diamond Dallas Page be Prince Iaukea, Arnold Anderson and Chris Benoit be Meng and Barbarian. Heat be Renegade and Jim Powers, Ice Train be VK Wall Street. WCW Cruiserweight title, Rey Mysterio Jr. be Pat Tanaka, Conan be John Tenta. Nasty Boys be Max and Morris, Chris Jericho be Jerry Flynn, Eddie Guerrero be Inferno, Rock and Roll Express be High Voltage. August 27 Kasahara, WAR, Battle Ranger be Takashi Okamura, Nobukazu Hirai be Jun Kikuchi, Lance Storm be Osamu Teitoko, Koki Kitahara be Masaaki Mochizuki, Geto and Jado be Ultimo Dragon and Yuji Yasurioka, Big Titan and Bam Bam Bigelow and Hiromichi Fuyuki be Nobutaka Araya and Arashi and Genichiro Tenryu. August 27 Totori FMW, Ayato Nanjo be Mamoru Okamoto, Miss Mongol be Ikeda, Hideki Hasaka be Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Taka Michinoku and Riki Fuji be Toryu and Super Leather, Miwa Sato and Crusher Matamari and Shark Tsuchiya be Megumi Kudo and Kaori Nakayama and Ri. Street Fight, Hido and Wing Kanemura be Gasaku Goshigawara and Koji Nakagawa, Hayabusa and Masato Tanaka and Katsutoshi Niyama be Hiskatsu Oya and The Gladiator and Alcon Negro. August 27 Yonago, All Japan Women, Miho Wakizawa be Yasho Kawamoto, Saya Endo be Momoe Nakanishi, Tashio Yamada and Genki Misae be Ri Tamada and Yoshiko Tamura, Asia Kong and Takako Inoue be Mima Shimoda and Yumiko Hara, Kaoru Ito be Atsuko Mita, Manami Toyota and Mariko Yoshida and Reggie Bennett be Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa. August 28 Nagano, All Japan, 2,800 Sellout, Satoru Asako be Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Masao Inoue and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi be Kentaro Shiga and Yoshinari Ogawa, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto be Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi and Mighty Inoue, Dan Crawford and Gary Albright be Ryukaku Izumida and Giant Kimala 2, Tama and Honda and Takao Omori be Steve Williams and Johnny Ace, Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kauta be Stan Hansen and Johnny Smith, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama be Kenta Kobashi and the Patriot. August 28 Himeji WAR, Yuji Yasurioka be Jun Kikuchi, Lance Storm be Battle Ranger, Arashi be Osamu Tashi Akari, Koki Kitahara be Takashi Okamura, Geto and Jado be Ultimo Dragon and Masaaki Mochizuki, Hiromichi Fuyuki and Bam Bam Bigelow and Big Titan be Genichiro Tenryu and Nobutaka Araya, and Nobukazu Hirai. August 28 Sanyo FMW Toryu be Hideo Makimura, Miwa Sato be Ikeda, Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo and Ribi Miss Mongol and Crusher Matamari and Shark Tsuchiya, Isakatsu Oya and Super Leather be Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Katsutoshi Niyama, The Gladiator be Alcon Negro, Hayabusa and Hayato Nanjo be Taka Michinoku and Riki Fuji, Hideki Hasaka and Hido and Wig Kanemura be Masato Tanaka and Katsutoshi Niyama and Gasaku Goshigawara. August 28, Acapulco, EMLL, 225, Loverboy and Black Silver BL Guerrero and Histrion, Karloff Lagarde Jr. and Corazon Salvaje BL Sagrado and Punky, Hector Garza and Shocker and Apollo Chino Bifalino and Bestia Salvaje and Emilio Charles Jr. August 28, Poplar Bluff, Missouri, North American All-Star Wrestling, Giant Warrior B. Bonecrusher, Charlie Parker B. Reggie Montgomery, Bart Sawyer B. Ron McClarity, Colorado Kid B. Bill Dundee DQ. August 29, Jonesboro, Arkansas, North American All-Star Wrestling, 360, Charlie Parker B. Reggie Montgomery, Giant Warrior B. Bonecrusher, Bart Sawyer B. Ron McClarity, Colorado Kid B. Bill Dundee, Jerry Lawler B. Coco Ware, Kid and Christopher Tide in Battle Royal. August 29, Sayreville, New Jersey, Universal Wrestling Superstars, 350, Gino Caruso B. Ice Pick DQ, East Village Riot Squad B. Rhino Power DQ, Virgil B. King Kong Bundy Core, Booty Man B. Greg Valentine DQ, Hellraiser B. Kodiak Bear. August 29, Nagoya, Battlerts, 238, Naohiro Hoshikawa B. Satoshi Yoniyama, Carl Greco B. Shoichi Funaki, Katsumi Yujuda D. Minoru Tanaka, Yuki Ishikawa and Alexander Otsuka B. Takeshi Ono and Daisuke Ikeda, Hoshikawa B. Duzalberto. August 30th, Osaka Furitsu Gym, All Japan Women, 5,300 Momoe Nakanishi B. Miho Wakezawa Yumi Fukawa and Kumiko Makawa B. Saya Endo and Genki Misae, Tomoko Watanabe B. Kaoru Ito, Mariko Yoshida B. Takako Inoue, Tsuko Mita B. Mima Shimoda, Manami Toyota and Yoshiko Tamura B. Toshio Yamada and Ri Tamada, Yumiko Hata NC Reggie Bennett, Asia Kong B. Kyoko Inoue to win Grand Prix tournament. August 30th, Orlando Disney Studios, WCW Worldwide Tapings, 600 Full House All Freebies, Alex Wright B. Disco Inferno, Brad Armstrong B. Chavo Guerrero Jr., Billy Kidman B. Jerry Lynn, Chris Jericho B. Prince Iaukea, Public Enemy B. Joe Gomez and Renegade, Jim Powers B. Mark Starr, Giant B. Gomez, Chris Benoit B. Jericho, Glacier B. Pat Tanaka, Eddie Guerrero B. Dean Malenko, Brad Armstrong B. Lynn, Lex Luger DDQ Rick Steiner, Randy Savage B. Meng. August 30th, Shizuoka, All Japan, 3,300 Sellout, Masao Inoue B. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa B. Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Asako, The Patriot B. Tamon Honda, Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi B. Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoda, Gary Albright B. Giant Kimalatu, Jun Akiyama B. Ryukaku Izumida, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi B. Stan Hansen and Dan Crawford, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Takao Mori B. Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Johnny Smith. August 30th, Memphis, USWA, 850, Bart Sawyer D. Flash Flanagan, Colorado Kid and Tony Williams B. Mike Samples and Giant Warrior, Jesse James Armstrong B. Punisher, Frank Morrell B. Tony Falk, Coco Werdker Brickhouse Brown, Sid Vicious and Brian Christopher and Wolfie D. and Doug Gilbert B. Bill Dundee and Jamie Dundee and Tommy Rich and Falk. Unified title, Vicious B. Jerry Lawler to win title. August 30th, Gunma WAR, Kamikaze B. Fukuda, Takashi Okamura and Osamu Teitoko B. Jun Kikuchi and Nobukazu Hirai, Masawaki Mochizuki and Ultimo Dragon B. Lance Storm and Yuji Yasurioka, Big Titan B. Arashi, Bam Bam Bigelow and Hiromichi Fuyuki B. Geto and Jado, Tatsumi Fujinami and Genichiro Tenryu B. Nobutaka Araya and Koki Kitahara. August 30th, Yamazaki, FMW, Miss Mongol B. Ikeda, Miwa Sato and Crusher Maidamari and Shark Tsuchiya B. Kaori Nakayama and Ri and Megumi Kudo, Toryu and Super Leather B. Katsutoshi Niyama and Memoru Okamoto, Hisakatsu Oya B. Okon Negro, Street Fight, Haido and Wing Kanemura B. Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Gasaku Goshigawara, Riki Fuji and Takamichi Noku, and the Gladiator B. Hayato Nanjo and Koji Nakagawa and Hayabusa, Masato Tanaka B. Hideki Hasaka, Nakagawa 1 Battle Royal. August 30th, Mexico City, Juan de la Barrera Gym AAA, Pinela Escarlata and My Flowers and Babe Sharon B. Frisbee and Discovery and Luxor, Super Muñeco and Pero Silva and Caris La Momia B. Oro Jr. and Salcero and Mexicano, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Teen Yables Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. B. El Ocon and Cian Caris and Jerry Estrada, and Juventud Guerrera DQ, Conan and Octagon and Pero Aguayo B. Cibernetico and Villano 4 and Killer. August 30th, Mexico City Arena, Mexico, EMLL, Olympico and Olympus B. Guerrero Maya and Guerrero del Futuro, Mascara Magica and Shocker and Olympico B. Bestia Salvaje and Alcon Negro Jr. and Karloff Lagarde Jr., Dandy and Atlantis and Lizmark B. Black Warrior and Emilio Charles Jr. and Negro Casas DQ. CMLL Tag Titles, Grand Marcus Jr. and El Hijo del Gladiator b Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Dos Caras DQ, Hair vs. Hair, Rambo b Brazo de Oro. August 30th, North Reading, Massachusetts, Yankee Pro Wrestling, 300, Brickhouse Brown, not original, b Rick Charles. Flash the Stinger b Troubleman Montero, Irish Leprechaun b Dana Carpenter, Power Company, Power Twins, b Storm Brothers, Arabian Assassin b Juan King, Rick Fuller b Pat Garrett, Charles 1 Battle Royal, Greg Valentine b Scott Ashworth, Booty Man b Kevin Kelly, Not Nails August 30th, Columbia, South Carolina, LIWA, Brutal Bushman 1 Battle Royal, Mad Matt DDQ David Palmer, Buddy Valentine and Mae Young b Lori Lynn and Jay Eagley, Fabulous Moolah b Kate O'Connor, Billy Bad b Superstar. August 30th, Miami, Sunshine Wrestling Federation, 550, Punk Rock b Buck Quartermain, Jimmy Del Rey b Andre Moore, Malia Hasaka b Lady Vendetta, Clay Hatfield b Bobby Davis, Paul Adonis b George Suave, Johnny Torres b Madman Pondo, Chief White Eagle and Lone Eagle b Demon Hellstorm and Little Bad John. August 30th, White Georgia, North Georgia Wrestling Alliance, Dusty Dotson b Kaminori, Scorpion b Hoghead Croy, Rick Justice b Scott Prather, Bounty Hunter b Repo Man, Keith and Ken and John Arden b Max Steele and Terry Lawler and Kid Ego. August 31st, Utica, New York, WCW 1200, Scorched b Kid Chris, Alex Wright b Disco Inferno, Chris Jericho b Dean Malenko, Hugh Morris b John Tenta, Nasty Boys b Public Enemy, Jim Duggan b Meng, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash b Sting and Lex Luger DQ, non-title, The Giant b Ric Flair. August 31st, Omiya, All Japan 2800 Sellout, Kentaro Shiga b Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Giant Kimala 2 and Ryukaku Izumida b Dan Crawford and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto b Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masafuchi, Jun Akiyama and Takawa Mori b Masao Inoue and Satoru Asako, Johnny Ace D the Patriot 30 Minutes, Steve Williams and Gary Albright b Johnny Smith and Stan Hansen, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi and Tamon Honda b Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa. August 31st, Tokyo Karaku and Hall, War 1800 Sellout, Takashi Okamura b Battle Ranger, Nobutaka Araya and Nobukazu Hirai b Osamu Tashi Akari and Arashi, Lance Storm and Yuji Yasu Ryoka b Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa, Geto b Masaaki Mochizuki, Jado b Koki Kitahara, Geto and Jado b Mochizuki and Kitahara, Genichiro Tenryu and Tatsumi Fujinami and Ultimo Dragon b Bam Bam Bigelow, and Hiromichi Fuyuki and Big Titan. August 31st, Nara, FMW, Hideo Makimura b Mamoru Okamoto, Miss Mongol b Ikeda, Hisakatsu Oya b Toryu, Kaori Nakayama and Ri and Megumi Kudo b Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Maidamari and Miwa Sato, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Alcon Negro and Hayabusa b Taka Michinoku and Riki Fuji and the Gladiator, Super Leather b Katsutoshi Niyama, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Deathmatch, Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura b Gasaku Goshigawara and Koji Nakagawa and Masato Tanaka. August 31st, Hiratsuka All Japan Women, Miho Wakezawa b Yasho Kawamoto, Saya Endo b Momoe Nakanishi, Ritamata and Yumi Fukawa b Yoshiko Tamura and Genki Misae, Tashio Yamada and Atsuko Mita and Reggie Bennett b Mima Shimoda and Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue, Yumiko Hata b Mariko Yoshida, Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito b Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Maekawa. August 31st, Kawasaki, Battlerts 282 Carl Greco b Alexander Otsuka, Takeshi Ono b Katsumi Yujuda, Daisuke Ikeda and Duzalberto b Shuichi Funaki and Satoshi Yoniyama, Yuki Ishikawa b Naohiro Hoshikawa. August 31st, Batesville, Mississippi, USWA, Bill and Jamie Dundee b Moondogs, Miss Texas b Luna Vachon, Colorado Kid D Wolfie D, Jerry Lawler b Brian Christopher. August 31st, Emory, Texas, Lone Star Wrestling Alliance 200, Kit Carson b Anthony Coletti, Scott Putski b Killer Brooks, Jimmy James b Carson, Bo Vegas b Black Bart, Terry Gordyker One Man Gang. August 31st, Greenport, New York, Universal Superstars of America, GQ Smooth b Psycho Bates DQ, Chucky, Dances with Dudley, The Intruder, Virgil b AJ Steele, Moody Man b Greg Valentine DQ, Bodyguard for Hire b LA Gore. August 31st, Goulds, Florida, Sunshine Wrestling Federation, 640, Alex G and Andre Moore b JR and Tommy James, Little Lone Eagle b Little Bad John, Johnny Torres b Madman Pondo, Demon Hellstorm b Death Row 3260 Death Row 1 Battle Royal. September 1st Nagoya Station, FMW 4510 sellout Memoru Okamoto B Deo Makimura, Ikeda B Miss Mongol, Riki Fuji and Takamichi Noku B Hayato Nanjo and Gasaku Goshigawara, Megumi and Ri and Kaori Nakayama B Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Maidamari and Miwa Sato, Katsutoshi Niyama B Hisakatsu Oya, Hayabusa B Falcon, Street Fight, The Gladiator B Super Leather No Rope Explosive Barbed Wire Double Hell Dynamite Match, Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda B Wing Kanemura and Haido and Hideki Hasaka. September 1st Tachigi, All Japan, 2050 Kentaro Shiga and Masao Inoue B Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Takawa Mori Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B Mighty Inoue, Yoshinari Ogawa B Satoru Asako, Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi B Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Giant Kimala 2 and Dan Crawford B Gary Albright and Johnny Smith, Stan Hansen B Ryukaku Izumida, The Patriot and Kena Kobashi D Steve Williams and Johnny Ace 30 Minutes, Giant Baba and Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taubi Miwaru Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Tamon Honda. September 1st Tokyo Korakuen Hall All Japan Women, 2300 sellout. Miho Wakezawa B Sekiguchi Yugashina and Momoe Nakanishi B Genki Misae and Yasho Kawamoto, Nana Takahashi B Koyama, Kickboxing, Yumiko Watanabe B Saya Endo, All Japan Junior title, Tomoko Miyaguchi B Yoshiko Tamura to win title, Tomoko Watanabe B Kumiko Makawa, All Japan Tag title, Sugar Sato and Chikeo Nagashima B Yumi Fukawa and Ri Tamada to win titles, Manami Toyota B Candy Akutsu, WWWA Super Light title, Shaparita Asari B Chiquita Azteca, Esther Moreno September 1st Takaoka, Michinoku Pro 1600, Tiger Mask B Masato Yakashiji, Wellington Wilkins Jr. B Naohiro Hoshikawa, Tomoko Kuzumi B Rieko Amano, Shiryu and Men's Teo and Dick Togu B Grand Naniwa and Super Delphin, on Grand Hamada. September 1st Tijuana, Noda California, AAA, 5200, Los X-Men and Bolida Umo B La Sombra and Los Brujas -1 star, Thunderbird and Jungla and Flammarion and Sombra B Halloween and Genghis Khan and Sueño Chicano and Forastero 1 star, Los Pandilleros 1 and 2 and 3 B Tony Arce and Vulcano and Rocco Valente DQ 2 stars, Misterioso and Damien and Phobia and El Hijo del Enfermero B Rey Mysterio Jr. and Leon Negro and Super Colo and Mascara Sagrada Jr. 1 star, Conan and Mascara Sagrada and Pero Ogueyo B Pierroth Jr. and Psicosis and Juventud Guerrero 1 star. September 1st Tokyo, Battlerts, Aft. Shoichi Funaki B Alexander Otsuka, Daisuke Ikeda B Takeshi Ono Katsumi Yujuda B Yuki Ishikawa. September 1st Tokyo, Ballards PM Shoichi Funaki B Minoru Tanaka, Dieselberto and Carl Greco B Alexander Otsuka and Satoshi Yoniyama, Yuki Ishikawa B Takeshi Ono, Daisuke Ikeda B Katsumi Yujuda to win one-day tournament. September 1st Poconos, Pennsylvania, Universal Superstars of America, HC Loke B AJ Steele, Primo Carnera 3 B Kodiak Bear, Lord Zoltan B TC Reynolds, Doink the Clown B Tim Pyre, Johnny Gunn B King Kala, Rodney Allen and Johnny Diamond B King Kong Bundy and L.A. Gore. September 1st Poplar Bluff, Missouri, North American All-Star Wrestling, Bone Crusher B Ron McClarty, Charlie Parker B Reggie Montgomery, J.T. Atlas B Vance Nevada, Bill Dundee B Bart Sawyer, Loser Leaves Town, Colorado Kid B Giant Warrior. September 1st Spring Place, Georgia, World Christian Federation, Randy Watkins B Joey Funk Outpatient and Chuck Colt B Keith Karloff and Red Scorpion, Johnny Quaz and Joey Funk B Scott James and Watkins, Widowmaker B Billy Montana, Johnny Blaze B Jimmy Sharp. September 2nd Chattanooga, Tennessee, WCW Monday Nitro tapings, 5,883 with 5,180 paid, Diamond Dallas Page B Alex Wright 3 stars, Harlem Heat B Greg Valentine and Buddy Valentino, Buddy Valentine 1 star, Chris Jericho B Dean Malenko 3 1/2 stars, The Giant B Brad Armstrong 3/4 of a star, Randy Savage B Ron Studd 1/2 of 1 star, Rick and Scott Steiner B Sting and Lex Luger DQ -1 star, Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson and Chris Benoit and Steve McMichael B Kevin Sullivan and Big Bubba and Mengan Barbarian 3¼ stars. September 2nd Memphis, USWA, Flash Flanagan B Tony Falk, Tommy Rich B Bart Sawyer, USWA Tag Titles, Moondogs B Vampire Warrior, David Heath, and Punisher, Barry Buchanan, Coco Ware B Brickhouse Brown, Luna Vachon B Miss Texas, USWA title, Brian Christopher B Mike Samples DQ, Jesse James Armstrong and Wolfie D.B. Bill and Jamie Dundee, unified title. Jerry Lawler beat Sid Vicious to regain title. Special thanks to Juan Lemieux, Ada Hearns, Dean Ice, Kurt Brown, Greg John, Dominic Valenti, Chuck Longerman, Tony Friedman, Ken Ducey, Danny Deese, Sarah Moore, Dan Paris, Ron Lemieux, Scott Cornish, Bernard Siegel, Hernan Villarreal, Rob Moore, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Bert Prentice, Mike Rogers. History of Japan Grand Prix Finals. 1985, Linus Asuka beat Dump Matsumoto. 1986, Yukari Amuro beat Chigusa Nagio. 1987, Chigusa Nagio beat Dump Matsumoto. 1988, Bull Nakano beat Yumiko Hata. 1989, Mitsuko Nishiwaki beat Medusa. 1990, Manami Toyota beat Yumiko Hata. 1991, Kyoko Inoue beat Asia Kong. 1992, Asia Kong beat Manami Toyota. 1993, Akira Hokuto beat Yumiko Hata. 1994, Yumiko Hata won round robin. 1995, Manami Toyota beat Yumiko Hata. Japanese television rundown. August 4th, All Japan, 1. Albright beat Kawada with a sleeper in about 12 minutes. This was Kawada's punishment for publicly criticizing company policy. Kawada got enough in to make it a good match, but mainly Albright dominated, throwing suplexes and getting near submissions. What happened was good, but not great, but fans weren't ready for the finish at that time since they're conditioned to the major singles matches lasting longer, so it was a flat finish. 2 3/4 stars. 2. Williams and Ace and Johnny Smith beat Hanson and Patriot and Manukia Mossman. A lot of missed spots. Hanson worked harder than usual, but he's barely hanging on. Williams was below par. Ace wasn't in until the finish but looked good. Mossman worked a lot and he's got potential but is still pretty green. Finish saw Smith pin Mossman after an elbow drop off the top rope. 1 1/2 star. EMLL. The TV of EMLL or AAA didn't air this past Sunday because President Zedio's State of the Union address was during the normal wrestling time slot. The major weekend show was August 30th at Arena Mexico with a double main event as Rambo beat Brazo de Oro in a hair versus hair match. Since Rambo already beat El Brazo in a hair match earlier this year, it apparently will set up a match at the year-end show in December where Rambo will face Brazo de Plata in a hair match. However, with Brazo de Plata having appeared on Promel television on rival TV Azteca, it might be difficult because anyone on TV Azteca can't appear on Televisa, which would mean if they were to set up that feud, none of the angles could air on television, which weakens the feud's drawing power considerably. The other top match saw Gran Marcus Jr. and El Hijo del Gladiator retain the CMLL tag titles, beating Dos Caras and Ryota Jalisco Jr. in 2 straight falls. The second fall had a DQ finish after Ryo was fouled behind the ref's back. He ripped off Marcus' mask, which apparently beings the build for their mask versus mask match in a few weeks. Brazo de Plata is still working for Promel as well, as he headlined their television taping on August 30th in Cuautitlán with El Brazo and Super Electra vs. Fuerza Guerrera and Blue Panther and El Signo. Andy Barrow, longtime manager of Killer, is now with Promel as a wrestler, while Jurito Estrada, who had disappeared from sight, worked the undercard along with Furia Guerrera, the younger brother of Juventud Guerrera. Atlantico had his mask at stake against the hair of Kung Fu on September 1st at Arena Coliseo, with Kung Fu no doubt losing what little hair he has left. EMLL ran August 28th in Acapulco and drew about 225 fans, and Super Luchas, the AAA house organ, really played up that AAA had drawn 8,500 for its show in the same city 11 days earlier. AAA. Biggest show of the week was August 30th at Juan de la Barrera Gym in Mexico City, with Conan and Octagon and Pero Aguayo beating Cibernetico and Villano 4 and Killer in 2 straight falls, ending when Conan powerbombed Cibernetico. In the semi, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Tinieblas Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. beat Halcón Dorado Jr. and Cien Karis and Jerry Estrada and Juventud Guerrera when Dorado low blowed both Sagrada Jr. and Tinieblas Jr. for the DQ. Newspaper reports on the show said that Mysterio Jr. looked even more spectacular than usual. Conan's September 1st show in Tijuana drew a near sellout of 5,200 at the Auditorio. It was the basic ECW style throughout the show, which has both been continuing to draw well and also be the subject of lots of complaints, with run-ins in most matches and mainly brawling with furniture and weapons and little in the way of wrestling. They did all sorts of feuds and challenges throughout the show. Halloween and Thunderbird continued their feud. Venom, who is originally from Tijuana, challenged Phobia, younger brother of Psicosis, to a hair versus mask match. Los Destructors were brought in and they basically ran a Tijuana versus Mexico City program against local heels Los Pandilleros, who became the faces since they're local. The finish saw Psicosis do a run-in, but he attacked Los Pandilleros, explaining that even though he was from Tijuana, he wanted to show that only wrestlers from Tijuana can beat up wrestlers from Tijuana. Phobia came up to help Psicosis, before Venom came out to brawl with Phobia. The semi had Misterioso and Damien and Phobia and El Hijo del Enfermero beating Rey Mysterio Jr. and Leon Negro and Super Colo and Mascara Sagrada Jr. in a total ECW garbage-style match ending with a clean finish as Misterioso pinned Mysterio Jr. with a knee drop to the stomach. Basically to help build intrigue for their mask versus mask match that will be at the Bull Ring fairly soon. Main event was a rush job as Conan and Mascara Sagrada and Arguello beat Juventud Guerrera and Psicosis and Pierre Roth Jr. All three falls combined lasted 11:15. Since the show had already lasted around 4 hours at that point. A couple of new Mysterio Jr. spots from recent TV shows here and tag matches with Conan. One spot is Conan Monkey flipping Mysterio Jr. who ends the move doing a Frankensteiner. The other is Conan press slamming him while Conan stands on the middle rope, throwing him onto Pierre Roth, who catches him. And while he's there, Mysterio Jr. twirls around and winds up doing a Hurricane Rana. Apparently the missing /A/EMLL television show is unavailable in the United States or from television in Mexico City, on satellite may be available off television from Hermosillo on M1, ch. 6, at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays. All Japan. Complete card for September 5th at Budokan Hall is Kenta Kobashi vs Stan Hansen for the Triple Crown, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama defending the tag titles against Steve Williams and Johnny Ace, Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa in Tamon Honda vs Toshiaki Kawada and Masafuchi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Takao Mori vs Gary Albright, Giant Baba and Masao Inoue and Satoru Asako vs Giant Kimala 2 and Ryukaku Izumida and Dan Crawford, Jumbo Tsuruta and Kentaro Shiga vs The Patriot and Johnny Smith and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota vs Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen. The main match of the week was September 1st in Tochigi where Patriot and Kobashi went to a 30-minute draw with Williams and Ace in a battle of tag title contenders. Patriot and Ace also worked a 30-minute singles draw on August 30th in Omiya. There is apparently considerable heat regarding Doug Furnas negotiating with WCW, as he's off the next tour as well, which makes 3 in a row, and Crawford has been doing jobs almost every night on this tour. After the Budokan, they are off until September 22nd and tour until October 18th at Budokan with Hanson, Williams, Albright, Ace, Patriot, Himala 2, Crawford, Bobby Duncombe Jr., Rob Van Dam, and Dory Funk. Misawa and Akiyama beat Patriot and Kobashi in a non-title match on August 28th in Nagano, which was said to have been one of the best matches of the year. This year's tag team tournament will have Misawa and Akiyama, Williams and Ace, Patriot and Kobashi and Tao and Kawada as the contending teams. Brian Diet, the former football player protege of Steve Williams who they were hoping to train to be a major force, didn't show up for this tour and is done with the promotion. A heavyweight boxer who they were training only lasted 3 days on the road before he wanted out. To say working with this promotion isn't easy is an understatement. I think that's why most of the wrestlers that come here wind up turning into good workers, because if they don't, they couldn't survive. August 18th TV show did a 3.8 rating while August 25th did a 4.4. Who can figure out why? New Japan. There was no press conference all week regarding the Tokyo Dome show. At this point there appears to be some question whether or not the show will take place due to a variety of issues. The original date of October 6th is out the window because the Nippon Ham Fighters baseball team which plays at the Dome may have a playoff game on that date. Later dates have problems because of an inability of holes in the TV Asahi prime time schedule. There is still the problem of getting Brazilians to do jobs. If no announcement is made this week then the show would have fallen through because as it is it's really late to be making an announcement of a show that you need to sell 50,000 plus tickets for to be a success. A correction from last week when he mentioned regarding the Muta vs Tenryu match that Keiji Muto hadn't done the gimmick in a few years. He actually did it in April for the Tokyo Dome match against Jinsei Shinzaki, Hakushi. August 24th television show which aired the fourth night of Sumo Hall's G1 tournament drew a 2.1 rating. Other Japan notes. Great Sasuke is now out of the hospital and doing office work but no word on when he'll return to the ring. Jinsei Shinzaki will be returning to Michinoku Pro shortly as the main draw with Sasuke out of action. There will be a Valley Tudo show on November 17th promoted by Satoru Sayama. The working idea, none of which has been announced publicly of yet, is to do a US vs Japan series with Japanese fighters facing a US team that would include Dan Severn, Don Fry, and Paul Verlins. Don't expect Ken Shamrock back in Pancrase. JWP is running a wrestling and dinner show at a hotel banquet room on October 4th with tickets, which include a full-course dinner and free drinks, going from $180 to $250. IWA's next tour will be September 22nd to September 29th with Tommy Rich, Dr. Luther, Len St. Clair, Freddie Krueger, Doug Gilbert, Barata Morgan Jr., Mr. Niebla, from EMLL, who lots of people rave about as being the best young wrestler in the promotion, and Leatherface, Rick Patterson. Beulah and Patricia from ECW are also scheduled for the tour. The tournament for the vacant UWA middleweight title, which will be contested in Michinoku Pro from September 12th to September 23rd, will have Tiger Mask, Men's Teo, Super Astro, Masato Yakashiji, and Shiryu. In FMW there have been some minor changes regarding the women. Bad Nurse Nakamura has changed her name to Ri, and is working as a face teaming with Megumi Kudo. Aki Kanbayashi has turned heel working as Miss Mongol. FMW ran a major show on September 1st outdoors in Nagoya with the first explosive barbed wire match ever in that city, drawing a sellout 4,510 fans, with Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda beating Wing Kanemura and Hideki Hasaka and Haido. The injury that has kept Mr. Pogo out of action was described as a severe neck injury. All Japan women, after failing to sell out Korakuen Hall for the past several shows, packed the building with 2,300 fans on September 1st for a show that actually concentrated on undercard wrestlers and didn't include most of the major AJW stars such as Asia Kong, Kyoko Inoue, Mima Shimoda, etc. The only top name that appeared on the show was Manami Toyota, who beat JWP's Candy Akutsu in the semifinal. Most of the show was built around undercard title bouts and inter-promotional matches. The main event saw the WWWA Super Lightweight title headline for the first time ever as Chaparita Asari pinned Chiquita Azteca, Mr. Moreno, of the JD promotion in a match with great flying moves, but the body of the match wasn't great. Azteca injured her neck badly on the finisher, which was Asari doing a form of a Frankensteiner off the top, and had to be hospitalized after the match. There were two title changes underneath as the Gia team of Chikeo Nagashima and Sugar Sato won the All Japan Tag Team titles, beating AJW's Yumi Fukawa and Ri Tamada in a great match that went more than 20 minutes with lots of great near falls. The other saw Tomoko Miyaguchi of JWP capture the All Japan Junior title, pinning Yoshiko Tamura with a crucifix off the middle rope in a good match. War on August 31st at Korakuen Hall drew 1,800 with Tenryu and Tatsumi Fujinami and Ultimo Dragon over Bam Bam Bigelow and Hiromichi Fuyuki and Big Titan on top. The hottest match on the show was an interpromotional match where Lance Storm and Yuji Yasuryoka beat the New Japan team of Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa when Yasuryoka surprisingly pinned Otani with a German suplex. The Brazilian leader of the crew that we talked about going to stop Ricardo Moraes from fighting at the August 24th Rings show was Renzo Gracie. Gracie also had words in mid-ring, not worked, with Akira Maeda over the controversial Danielson Maya vs. Ilukine Mikhail match. USWA. The unified title changed hands twice over the Labor Day weekend. First, on August 30th in Memphis, Sid Vicious subbed for the no-showing Jake Roberts to win the title from Jerry Lawler using the powerbomb in about 90 seconds. In the rematch on September 2nd, Lawler put up both his hair and his manager Scott Bowden's hair against the title, so naturally Lawler regained it. No word on why Roberts no-showed, although when he did, Lawler over the house mic claimed it was because he was passed out in the Atlanta airport, and then it was said simply that Roberts missed his flight. Other title change was at the August 31st television show. Jamie Dundee won the TV title from Wolfie D when his father interfered and they used the hubcap on Wolfie. Jamie Dundee did an interview saying he couldn't understand why Jesse James Armstrong would team with Wolfie D since they had nothing against each other. Armstrong came out and said Jamie was right, but that he had a problem with Bill Dundee because Bill had spray-painted him in Louisville. Samantha is now wearing a neck brace to sell the piledriver Wolfie gave him on the August 23rd show. The August 30th show drew about 850 fans, which is profitable at the Big One flea market. A similar-sized crowd at the Mid-South Coliseum would have been a money loser. Lawler did an interview saying on Saturday that he was going to do push-ups and sit-ups for one day and he'd be in the best shape of his career. Tommy Rich said that Labor Day was his favorite holiday because he didn't have to buy anyone presents and because they always had wrestling matches that night so he'd get to beat someone up. Vampire Warrior and Luna Vachon are in, with Luna working a program against Miss Texas. Vampire started out teaming with Punisher against the Moondogs on September 2nd, but walked out on him during the tag title match. They had a USWA and NAW combined battle royal on August 29th in Jonesboro, which came down to Colorado Kid of NAW against Brian Christopher. Christopher turned himself heel as both men went over together to set up a rematch. ECW. No house shows for 2 more weeks. The situation involving Cmll was that he had his throat slashed in a restaurant brawl and needed 50 stitches. Here and there. Doug Body, a regular Howard Stern guest who suffered from muscular dystrophy and was a regular at Southern California Pro Wrestling and Lucha Libre shows, passed away on August 23. He also worked as a comedic sidekick for the late Sam Kinison and was guest timekeeper at the World Wrestling Peace Festival, which was a story in itself, and with his partner had done guest ring announcing on local WWF house shows. He used to attend Southern California Lucha Libre shows and annoy the Mexican fans by chanting USA like an American wrestling mark. The current lineup for the EFC pay-per-view show on October 18 is Marcus Conan Silveira vs. Danielson Maya and Bart Valley vs. Rodney McSwain in the heavyweight division, Igor Zinoviev vs. Unknown, Alan Goes, who had the famous Pancrase match against Frank Shamrock in 1985, versus Eduardo Amati, Matt Hume, who was on the most recent Pancrase pay-per-view in what was a somewhat suspicious-looking match against Ken Shamrock, versus Eric Paulson, WCC, and Todd Bjornathan, former Pancrase fighter, versus Rudy Moncayo, UFC 6 and EFC 1, Ralph Gracie vs. Ali Mayubi and Eugenio Tato vs. John Lewis in the lightweights and Alfonso Alcaraz vs. Joao Roque in the bantamweights. The Gracie match looks to be another squash since he's facing a kickboxer. Ralph Gracie refused to fight either John Lewis or Tato, both of whom are skilled ground fighters, while Renzo Gracie refused to fight Goes. AWF did a television taping on August 24 in Tampa and has a press conference on September 12 in New York to kick off its fall television schedule. The group has bought television time in most major markets. We have a report that the attendance on the Mickey Doyle retirement show in LaSalle, ONT was closer to 475 than the 950 reported here, but there is no way to verify those figures. Greg Price's All-Star Wrestling has upcoming shows on September 7 in Statesville, North Carolina, Rob Van Dam vs. Billy Black, September 18 in Chase City, Virginia, Johnny Gunn vs. Gorgeous George 3, September 19 in Wilson, North Carolina, Gunn vs. Barbarian, and September 20 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, Gunn vs. Barbarian. Green Mountain Wrestling on October 6 at 2 p.m. at the National Guard Armory in Newport, Vermont. Fabulous Moolah and Johnny May Young both worked a Moolah card on August 30 in Columbia, South Carolina. Johnny May is 72 years old and Moolah couldn't be far behind. RF Video at P.O. Box 797, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19047 is selling tapes of the old SMW promotion hosted by Jim Cornette, including several arena matches directly off the master tape that either didn't appear on television, or complete matches where only clips aired on television. A group called Yankee Pro Wrestling featured a wrestler called Juan King, who looks exactly like Don King. A correction from last week's results. The August 24th show billed as Steel City Wrestling was actually Grand Slam Wrestling, although they were using the Steel City Wrestling license. So the tag title change referred to in the results with Typhoon and Demolition Axe beating the Texas Hangman was for the Grand Slam Wrestling tag titles. The SCW tag champs are Stevie Richards and Blue Meanie. At the IFC show on August 23 in Biloxi, Mississippi, Anthony Macias beat all 3 guys in under 1 minute. The match with Gene Leidick, which the commissioner stopped when Leidick, a protege of Billy Robinson, had his nose broken by the first punch, was stopped at the 8-second mark, and you can imagine he was upset by that. UFC. A correction from last week. Fabio Gurgel, who is in the next UFC, never beat Royce Gracie in a jiu-jitsu match. Gurgel did win the recent World Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Championships in the 200-pound weight class in Rio de Janeiro in February. The fighter who did beat Royce Gracie, causing Gracie to no longer enter jiu-jitsu competitions, was Fabio Santos. Ken Shamrock is pretty much committed to entering the Ultimate on December 20th, which would be the first UFC tournament he's entered since UFC 3. He had long vowed never to enter another UFC tournament. The Ultimate will be, maybe not from an excitement level, but from a competitive level, the toughest show ever to win, with Shamrock, Dan Severn, Mark Coleman and Don Fry as pretty much solid guys in, and Oleg Toktarov and Marco Ruiz maybe being in as well. Cal Warsham 1-1 has apparently been added as the 7th man in the September 20th pay-per-view show tournament, with 1 slot still remaining. WCW. Besides the main angle, other Nitro highlights for September 2nd from Chattanooga before 5,893, 5,180 paying $63,040, had Diamond Dallas Page over Alex Wright in 343 with a Diamond Cutter in a very good short match. Gene Okerlund interviewed Nick Patrick, who had words with Okerlund. Can't wait to see the Patrick vs. Oberlin match. No, it isn't really going to happen. Rob Parker gave Sherry presents, which I guess explained why neither was at ringside while Harlem Heat beat Greg Valentine and Buddy Valentino. Florida indie wrestler Buddy Valentine. Nasty Boys jumped Heat during their interview. It's basic being Heat vs. Nasties for the tag title on Fall Brawl instead of Heat vs. Steiners as was announced last week. Chris Jericho pinned Dean Malenko with a front cradle in 9 minutes of a very good match. Match would have been even better except Ted DiBiase walked out during the match and they had to go to rest holds so the wrestlers didn't steal the crowd's attention from the important thing going on in the crowd. That's a first. While this wasn't national, in numerous systems around the country, WWF was able to buy 2 national ads for the Shawn Michaels vs. Goldust Friday Raw special. Giant pinned Brad Armstrong with a choke slam. Randy Savage pinned Ron Studd with an elbow off the top. Steiners beat Sting and Lex Luger in 39 seconds when Rick shoved Luger into Patrick, who was grazed but called for the DQ. Sting and Luger then chased Patrick out of the building and he ran away, and they wound up stealing a police car and chasing down DiBiase. Horsemen beat Bubba and Sullivan and Meng and Barbarian when Flair, with help from Woman, used the figure 4 to beat Sullivan in 1642. Match had a ton of heat because the Horsemen were so over as faces, and was darn good most of the way since Benoit worked most of the match. The opening sequences with Sullivan trying to figure out how to work with McMichael are some of the most unintentionally hilarious moments you'll see. They were trying to tell the story that Woman was putting business in front of personal and she was screaming that at Benoit after since he helped Flair beat her husband, although we aren't supposed to know yet that it is her husband. The Disney tapings on August 30th was loaded up with good wrestling with lots of airtime devoted to the good younger wrestlers like Alex Wright, Brad Armstrong, Billy Kidman, Chris Jericho, etc. Public Enemy is now doing a Bushwhackers-type gimmick where they dance and hug fans as they come to the ring. Benoit beat Jericho in a good match, and Eddie Guerrero beat Dean Malenko in an even better match. Glacier, who wrestled in the blue light, beat Pat Tanaka. Lex Luger wrestled Rick Steiner in a singles match, and as both guys went over the top rope together, Nick Patrick disqualified both of them. After doing a sack in the Carolina Panthers opening game on September 1st, Kevin Green strutted around like Ric Flair. It was reported on many news outlets he was doing the Ric Flair strut. Only house show of the past week was August 31st in Utica, New York at the baseball stadium before 1,200 fans. 2 local DJs had a horrible opener, although one ended up throwing a fireball for the finish. The best 2 matches were the first 2 with Right Over Disco Inferno and Jericho pinning Malenko. The final 3 matches lasted only 15 minutes total, with Jim Duggan over Meng in an awful match, Hall and Nash beating Sting and Luger via DQ with a Nick Patrick finish, as Sting had Hall in the Scorpion and Hall submitted, but Patrick instead DQ'd Sting since Hall wasn't the legal man in the ring. Hall and Nash were the most over babyfaces on the show, followed by Flair, and momentarily after that finish being so screwed, the fans got behind Sting, but when he stood on the post to get more cheers, they ended up booing him out of the place. Flair did a job in about 5 minutes for the Giants choke slam in a poor match. Some notes on the record-setting August 26 Nitro show. The rating peaked midway through the second hour, during the Flair and Anderson vs. Rock and Roll Express match with a 5.0, and then it dropped to a 4.7 for the remainder of the show including the angle at the end. The demographic breakdown percentages were about the same, which means that the kids and teens audience that usually watches WWF didn't watch this show with no WWF competition on at the same time. However, the highest concentration of kids came for the Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. JL match where 15% of the audience was under 11. WCW traditionally is 10 to 12%, however Mysterio Jr. had no effect drawing any extra teenagers. WWF. A correction on the upcoming pay-per-view show. It's being held at the Core State Center, not the Core State Spectrum. It's the first wrestling show at the new building, which seats 22,400. I was told that it's the nicest arena in the country to watch a sports event in. The weekly pay-per-view idea has been totally dropped as it simply wasn't feasible on a number of levels. Kurt Angle, who won the gold medal at 220 pounds in the Olympics, received an offer from Linda McMahon. Angle has also received offers from at least 2 Japanese promotions, at least one of which was either Rings or UWFI. Achim Albrecht, that's probably spelled wrong, who is a German bodybuilder who has been in recent Mr. Olympia contests, signed a deal with WWF. Although he's not as tall as Jim Hellwig or Lex Luger, Albrecht would certainly, when he wrestles, have by far the greatest physique of anyone ever to step foot in a pro wrestling ring, as advances in, well, nutrition, and other things that guys call nutrition, put him well above the level of former Mr. Olympia types from other generations like Roy Callender or Earl Maynard. Albrecht was the guy in the Joe Weider ads for muscle mass powders that aired on cable a few years back. I don't know if he has any kind of athletic background, but it on the surface sure seems like a major risk, taking a steroid freak out of the gym and trying to make him a wrestler. Not that 11 or 12 years ago, a few guys with minimal or even no talent following the same route became huge stars. Shawn Michaels is on the cover of the October Playgirl. The article mainly has him talking about what kind of women he likes. There is still underlying heat between Michaels and Jim Cornette, and also Jim Ross. Apparently Michaels feels he's drawing the big houses, but that the booking is outdated, and resented Cornette, who works in the office, getting a big push. Someone had to take the blame for the original main event of Vader and Cornette versus Michaels and Jose Lothario that was changed to Michaels versus Mankind. The South Africa tour, which is headlined mainly by either Bret Hart versus Davey Boy Smith or Hart and Mark Merrow versus Smith and Owen Hart, which starts on August 8th, is almost totally sold out for every show. Some upcoming major dates. Survivor Series is November 17th in Madison Square Garden, with Raw on November 18th in New Haven and Superstars on November 19th in Springfield, Massachusetts. The final pay-per-view of the year will be In Your House on December 15th in West Palm Beach, Florida. The Royal Rumble will be January 19, 1997 at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, and they are planning right now for a 72,000-seat setup, so they must have huge plans for the show, which is in Michael's hometown. The February 16, 1997 In Your House will be from Memphis, and WrestleMania is March 30, 1997 from the Rosemont Horizon. Carl DeMarco, who is the president of WWF Canada, hasn't been Bret Hart's business manager since May 1995, but was for several years. TV Guide in Canada ran a feature with Sonny's chocolate chip recipe. The storyline on the Mr. Perfect/Hunter Hearst Helmsley deal isn't to set up a feud between the two, but that Perfect is taking the women away, so Helmsley concentrates more on his wrestling, and Perfect will end up being a mentor of sorts for him, so set Triple H for a push after doing jobs all summer. Vader is now using the powerbomb as a finisher and will feud with Sid over who has the best powerbomb. They are doing some sort of an angle involving Brian Pillman, with Bret Hart talking about Stu Hart as Pillman's father figure. Roddy Piper was at the CNE show in Toronto on August 24th. By the way, that was the largest non-pay-per-view crowd to see pro wrestling in North America since July 31, 1988, when a Hulk Hogan vs. Andre the Giant match at Milwaukee County Stadium drew 25,866. The Bodydonnas are no more. Zip Tom Pritchard is being taken off the road and will work as a trainer for guys like Mark Henry and Albrecht and anyone else they sign. Skip is injured, and when he comes back, it'll be with a new gimmick and probably back as a heel. Pillman will be doing color commentary on the September 6th Friday Raw special. There have been interviews shot with Farouk holding the IC title for whatever that is worth. Correction from last week. At the August 25th Nassau Coliseum show, we had an incorrect result in the Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith vs. Sid and Jim Neidhart match. The finish saw Hart pin Neidhart, not a DQ for Vader interfering. Vader did attack Sid after the match. Hart and Smith got a total babyface reaction against Smoking Guns in their first meeting on the Toronto show, and this was after Hart and Smith tried to get Hill Heat working an angle with two local football players. The Reader's Pages. ECW. On August 3rd, I attended the ECW arena show just like so many times before, but this time was different. I sat up in the bleachers with my friends like I always do. I waited 1 hour for the show to start. During the first match, my friend and I held up a Wings King of Danger banner. Nobody minded it. Then right before the third match was about to start, Axel Rotten vs. Bubba Ray Dudley, we held up the banner again so Axel could see it. 5 or 10 seconds later, 3 or 4 security cops came up really hostile to us and threatening us, saying they were taking the banner away. I never saw this kind of hostility before from security when fans threw things in the ring at the wrestlers or got into altercations with wrestlers. I've been coming to the ECW arena for more than 2 years. What does holding a banner of a Japanese promotion do to get people to hot and upset? Jeff Rishlock. Royersford, Pennsylvania. I had to write in response to the recent wave of negative letters concerning ECW. The main criticism of ECW that annoys me is the claim that its brutal style lacks believability. Some readers have written that ECW lacks believability because there is no way anyone could take the punishment that these guys supposedly take and continue to come back. While I feel that assessment is valid, I find it laughable that any observer readers fail to recognize that all pro wrestling is built on a lack of believability. The idea of a man being punched in the face without being busted open. A vertical suplex lacks believability. Even a whip to the ropes lacks believability. Not only do wrestling moves lack believability, but so do most gimmicks and angles. Undertaker is a great gimmick, but there's no believability. Where's the believability in Shawn Michaels beating men the size of Vader and Yokozuna? What WWF and WCW puts on television is no more believable than what ECW does. The only difference is fans have been taught to accept traditional American pro wrestling as believable, and ECW hasn't been around long enough to do this. Anyone who thinks any pro wrestling, and particularly ECW, isn't physically demanding is sadly mistaken. I've been an independent referee in the past and have seen firsthand what physical demands these men must meet. They are true entertainers and great athletes. For people to demean the athletic ability of these men is wrong. Joe Zaniel. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Sunshine Wrestling Federation. I've been a big fan of wrestling since the age of 12, and over the years I've grown a real fondness for it, and at times have been disappointed by what I've seen. While in the service, my wife and I got to meet many of the stars of the old Florida Championship Wrestling promotion, and to this day I've maintained a friendship with some of those people. I suppose because of my fondness for wrestling, I try and keep friendly with people in and around the sport. The reason I'm telling you this is so I can qualify myself to be able to make the statement I am about to with some authority. What kind of a promoter publicizes his or her immediate business plan in a forum like The Observer for all the rival promoters to read? Is he trying to get other marks to invest in his pipe dream? I can understand trying to garner interest in the Wall Street Journal to get potential investors, but where does he get off asking for special coverage because he drew 4,000 fans? Bernie Siegel neglected to mention that the only reason he drew so many fans was that the show was a guaranteed show at an Indian reservation, and anyone who was there could watch the show for free, including thousands of underprivileged kids who were there as part of some sort of a camp program. I know this to be true because I was there. He states they're going to do television, create a new type of multi-promotional organization, and even try to get into licensing. What a joke that is. This is a group that uses handheld camcorders at their shows. What makes them think they can do what ECW hasn't been able to do, what Herb Abrams, Max Andrews, Joe Petticino, Mario Savoldi, and countless others couldn't do with real production crews and much better shows? These people have had real big-name talent behind them like Bam Bam Bigelow, Steve Williams, and others. Who does the SWF have? Demon Hellstorm. That's a licensing bonanza for you. What about people like Bill Watts and Fritz von Erich that ended up going out of business? Does Siegel think he knows more about the wrestling business than these guys? In regard to his statement about taking venture capitalists for major expansion, that means going public. Back in 1986, while living in Atlanta, I was ignorant enough to invest $15,000 in a wrestling penny stock called Global Wrestling out of Boca Raton, Florida. I bought the restricted stock at 25 cents a share and thought I hit pay dirt when the stock went up to $18 per show. Today, it makes fine wallpaper. All the people associated with taking the company public ended up in jail. 3 or 4 years ago, I got a call from a broker who offered me a stock called Madison Sports. They supposed we're going to have both wrestling and roller derby divisions, although I can't remember the names of their respective organizations. I thought about it for about a millisecond and decided to pass. All I can say is that I haven't seen any new major wrestling or roller derby organization pop up in the last 3 years. The other thing that irked me was Siegel saying the NWA is a mere shadow of what it once was. Although that's true, I don't see the SWF champion main eventing on a UFC pay-per-view. I don't see him wrestling for New Japan or in Japanese Vale Tudo events. According to the NWA's Miami promoter, Howard Brody, Siegel's partner, Bill Brown, has called Dennis Coralluzzo asking for NWA membership but was turned down because Brody is their promoter in the area. I'm sure when Brody and Coralluzzo read Siegel's letter implying the demise of the NWA, they'll get perturbed. It's great that Sunshine runs successful little spot shows in and around Miami, drawing 200 to 500 at the local Little League fields by selling tickets door to door, but that's a long way from Madison Square Garden or even the ECW arena. Wrestling isn't like it once was, and there's a reason for it. When people try and buy their way into the business, it never works. Sometimes it doesn't even work for people who have grown up in the business and are not only well-financed, but know the difference between a work and a shoot. It's unfortunate that 99.9% of the time outsiders fail in wrestling is because it becomes an ego trip of tremendous proportions. Tim McKenna. Miami, Florida. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to meet and correspond with many of the major wrestling promoters around the world, as well as many independent promoters. If there is one thing I've observed, it is that there is no bigger threat to the wrestling business than the naivete of fledgling promoters. Bernie Siegel has 2 chances of being successful in the wrestling business, slim and none. The successful promotion of pro wrestling in today's world requires a vast amount of varied knowledge, talents, and skills. There are many promoters, some of whom had lengthy track records of success and some of whom had an awful lot of money behind them who couldn't cut the mustard. What exactly qualifies Bernie Siegel to succeed when others such as Jim Cornette, Jim Crockett, Ron Scholar and others have failed? Perhaps he'd like to discuss promoting fortunes with John Arezzi, T.C. Martin, Joel Goodhart or Gordon Scozzari, and if he doesn't know who those people are, he should. Basing one's qualifications for wrestling success as a show that drew 4,000 people at an Indian reservation, where anyone on the reservation could see the show for free, will never make anyone a threat to WWF, WCW or anyone else for that matter. Paul Alperstein's AWF will be on television in many major markets this fall, only because Alperstein is literally spending millions of dollars to make it happen. Just how soon do you think he's going to be seeing the better part of his investment back? Why not ask Todd Gordon how much money he went through before ECW reached its current level? That company still has to pay for its television time and is losing markets on a regular basis. At least ECW has a unique product for the American market. Siegel says that most importantly he's going to develop licensing. Wake up. The WWF doesn't even do its own licensing anymore. If Vince McMahon can't make a go of it, well, consider this. Someone like Jim Cornette, who is one of the most brilliant minds in the modern history of pro wrestling, who followed the business from a young age, could not pull off what you are attempting. Have you been around wrestling day-to-day half as long as Cornette? Have you been a fan as long as Cornette? Have you seen as many cards as Cornette? If you answered no to any of those questions, your present business course is delusional. You may be able to get a story out of the Wall Street Journal, but those of us who have been near the wrestling business for a length of time aren't being fooled. I can tell you from many years of experience in the entertainment industry, that just because you can sit at a table and be a party to the business, doesn't mean you can actually compete in that business. You have the experience of a slingshot in a machine gun world. Pro wrestling doesn't need people holding its checkbook who aren't experienced or qualified to conduct its business competently. Before you take any investor's money and before you lose your own money, you need to either give it up or book a lot more Indian reservations. Sheldon Goldberg, Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. Hall of Fame. I must commend you for tackling the Hall of Fame idea. The very nature of pro wrestling makes it a tongue-in-cheek, opinionated effort at best. If you had given me the assignment, I'd have broken the Hall into 5 major categories: pre-1,950 wrestlers, post-1,950 wrestlers, promoters, managers and announcers. The first group would consist of those who performed before the advent of television. Those of us who saw them live realized that their efforts were lackluster when compared to today's wrestlers. Most were small, not particularly athletic-looking, had very little or no charisma, and often participated as buck-grabbing part-timers who had other means of making a living. Television required visual appeal. Thus the pro wrestler became a big, muscular showpiece replete with fancy ring costumes. They become more dedicated, better trained, more dexterous and stronger than their predecessors. The money, popularity and other perks appealed to more. Thus the competition became greater and the requirements to be a member of the elite increased. By yesterday's standards, any preliminary wrestler of today would have been a superstar based on ability. Promoters, like baseball owners, shaped pro wrestling based on business opportunities. They were and are masterful psychologists who know their audiences well. One difference is that today's promoters must include in their plans an important partner: television station managers. Managers. How much did and do they lend to their charges' popularity? A whole lot. Their pitchman capabilities became the sizzle to the steak. At times they become more important than those they represent in the ring. A wrestler, regardless of ability, can be a disappointment to the audience if the television announcer chooses to downplay him. How many times have we heard announcers alter the perception of the viewer by the way they handle the action? How often has the ignorance or lack of understanding of the psychology of what is going on in the ring ruined a great match and a great performer? You've harped on this deficiency many times. I'd like to make some comments and corrections to your article. Wild Red Berry was the Jim Cornette of his era. He could do wonders with words and allegories. He was also a darn good wrestler in his day, and specialized in sneaky ways to win matches. His specialty, the Gilligan Twist, was the forerunner of today's Scorpion Deathlock, except it was applied in a standing position. Gorgeous George's real name was George Wagner. Raymond was his middle name. Karl Gotch was not the name Karl ist as used in the WWF. He was known as Karl Krauser. Vince McMahon Sr. changed it because he felt there would be confusion if he used the name Gotch. You failed to mention about Eddie Graham that he was half of the Graham brothers tag team with Dr. Jerry in the early days of the WWF. Dick Lane was, besides the premier West Coast wrestling television announcer, an accomplished movie actor. He had supporting cast credits in films such as I Can Get It For You Wholesale, The Outcast of Poker Flats, and Union Pacific, just to name a few. Greg Valentine is not blood related to Johnny Valentine. He took his name because he facially resembled the former. I'd also add the following to your list. Jack Pfeffer, a former carnival pitchman of European bearing who parlayed himself into the powerful promoter in New York and the surrounding areas. He controlled Madison Square Garden and the major New York arenas and had in his stable most of the big East Coast names. He was a maverick who was despised by other promoters because he wouldn't join their good old boys club and was a cheapskate as he worked his wrestlers for peanuts. How could you leave out Gene Stanley? He was the Billy Graham or Hulk Hogan of his day. Bleached blonde, resplendent in sequined robes with an ever-present smile, who lacked talent, but had tons of showmanship. His main competitor for popularity in the early 50s was Antonino Rocca. Although unknown to most Americans, India's Great Gama should be on your list. A hulk of a man, his strength was legendary. Wrestlers in Asia performed not in rings but on a level ground, usually patches covered with sand or soft dirt. The symbol of a champion was a large baton ornate metallic truncheon. It was reported that he had a match with George Hackenschmidt that drew 70,000 fans. In regards to Hackenschmidt, he was also a world-renowned chess master. Lastly, there should be a category for ring announcers. Don't the likes of Jules Strongbow, Jimmy Lake, Gary Capetta, Johnny 80 and Jimmy Lennon deserve some recognition? They were an essential, albeit small, part of the business. Howard Siegel. Yonkers, New York. Response from Dave Meltzer. Karl Gotch wrestled as Karl Krauser in the WWF in the early 60s, but came back in the early 70s to form a championship tag team with Rene Goulet under the Karl Gotch name. Greg Valentine is the son of Johnny Valentine, although Johnny during his active career never wanted it known because he felt it would kill his image if fans knew he was old enough to have a son that was wrestling. In hindsight, the one name I'm convinced of that deserved mention that I hadn't thought of was Jimmy Lennon. Based on legend, Great Gama belongs, but so much of his legend is based on hearsay and is almost impossible to corroborate, but I recognize in his day there were people who thought he was better than Gotch or Hackenschmidt. Then again, I've heard the viewpoint that Hackenschmidt was simply a guy with a great body for his time period promoted to be a champion and not a skilled wrestler. I think the idea of an Observer Hall of Fame is an excellent one. Anytime we are able to honor the people that have provided us with enjoyment over the years, we should do so. Basically, I have no complaints with the names you listed, even though there are a few names I don't recognize, but I'd like to list some people I feel are worthy of this honor. First and foremost is Wahoo Mcdaniel, which I believe was a glaring omission. Generally, he would set attendance records in almost every territory he wrestled in. In the Mid-Atlantic, his ring wars against Johnny Valentine and Ric Flair were legendary. He's held nearly every title in every territory he worked, with the exception of the world title. When one thinks of Wahoo, they think of his vicious chops, but he could also wrestle. Those who witnessed his world title matches against Jack Briscoe, Terry Funk and Harley Race can attest to that. In the tag team division, no list would be complete without Jerry and Eddie Graham and Ole and Gene Anderson. While neither team were brothers, it doesn't diminish the importance each had during their limelight. With manager Bobby Davis, no team drew more heat than the Graham brothers. While you've listed Eddie and Billy Graham, don't you feel the catalyst for their success was Jerry Graham? Those of us who are old enough can remember the tremendous matches between the Graham brothers against the likes of Argentina Rocca and Miguel Perez, Mark Lewin, and Don Curtis, and the Bastian brothers. The Anderson brothers did exactly what the sport is called. They wrestled. No music, no fancy robes, no dancing, no strutting. Just going in and beating their opponents, including teams like Wahoo Mcdaniel and Paul Jones, Tim Woods and Dino Bravo and Ric Flair and Greg Valentine. Could they draw heat? So much so that they drove an 80-year-old man to Stabole after a match in Greenville. Several promoters were listed, and I'd like to suggest both Jim Crockett Sr. and Jr. While I wasn't living in the Mid-Atlantic area during the reign of Jim Sr., I am aware he was a very well-respected and successful promoter. Jim Jr. did a tremendous job in the 70s and early 80s by making the Mid-Atlantic area one of the hotbeds, if not the hotbed of pro wrestling, by bringing in the likes of Valentine, Daniel, Flair, Woods, Blackjack Mulligan, Sergeant Slaughter, Ricky Steamboat, Ivan Koloff, the Andersons, Roddy Piper, etc. One more question: where was Dick Murdoch's name? Jim McNerney. Midland, North Carolina. Your article on the Hall of Fame was an enjoyable read. I'd like to see more than just an Observer Hall of Fame. If there ever is to be one established, it's going to be a long time before all the deserving are awarded. Several dozen is way too many to put in at one time. It's a similar situation to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where legends like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones didn't get inducted the first year. I recently visited St. Louis. Can you think of a more historically appropriate place for a pro wrestling museum and Hall of Fame? I think the most conspicuous omission from your list wasn't Wilbur Snyder, but Dave Meltzer. I don't think it's necessary to list credentials. There are pioneer sports writers who are in the Baseball and Boxing Hall of Fames, and rightly so. Jonathan Fogelman. Editor, ambivalent response. I think an Observer Hall of Fame is an excellent, long overdue idea. I think a good idea would be to split wrestlers categorized by decades. Maybe start from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, 90s. This would make voters give fair representation to wrestlers from each time period and eliminate nightmare ballots consisting of nothing but post-1984 wrestlers. Also take into consideration you are starting something new for a profession that is a century old. Baseball ballots don't have the problem of choosing between Babe Ruth and Eddie Murray, but imagine having 5 slots and having to choose between Bruno Sammartino and Randy Savage. Both are deserving, but does Savage deserve to go in before Bruno? By giving each decade a few slots, each vote becomes more relative. Everybody has strong ideas about what makes a good wrestler. I'm not a big fan of today's acrobatic style, but recognize great talents like Jushin Liger and Rey Mysterio Jr. Most people recognize greatness, and I'm confident most Observer readers share a sense of what a good wrestler encompasses within their best decade. I never saw Otto Graham, Joe DiMaggio or Bob Cousy, but I've heard the stories, seen the videos, and you can read the stats. Wrestling doesn't have the stats, but we still have the stories and the videos. I've listened to my grandfather talk about seeing Strangler Lewis when he was a kid. This can be fun every year, but I hope some serious effort goes into the structure of this project. The fans, and more importantly, the deserving wrestlers, have waited too long for something like this. Ron Rusciatano. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Great job on the Hall of Fame. I enjoyed your selections far more than the others I've seen over the past 5 years. As a quick test, I've always looked to see if Earl McCready is included. As you can guess, he's usually left out in favor of someone like Chief Jay Strongbow or Blackjack Mulligan or another deserving but lesser star. As a first ballot listing, I thought you included nearly everyone who inarguably had to be there. Vader didn't belong with this group, even with his collection of world titles. Superstar Graham was a bit of a gift as well. I'd have included the Sharp brothers, although tag teams can be tough because some of the most notable tag teams included guys that wouldn't be considered individually, like the Mills brothers, Anderson brothers, or even Black Gordman and Goliath. As tough as tag teams are, what do you do with people like Fabulous Moolah or Skylo Low? I think you've got to put them in. Ernie Roth may not be a first ballot pick, but he was the best manager I ever saw. Al Haft, Morris Siegel, and Eddie Quinn seem like obvious picks, along with Don and Herb Owen. If you're going to include Gordon Solie and Lance Russell, then how about Stanley Weston and Bill Apter? And when you do put in Edward Carpentier, please don't call him Eduardo, even though he was billed that way in cities where promoters didn't know the difference between French, ersatz Italian, or Spanish. Gary Will. Waterloo, Ontario. Great job on the Hall of Fame idea. Just a few minor quibbling. I thought you put way too many people in at one time. It would have been better to begin with a dozen or so and add 4 or 5 each year. That way you get a better feel for the importance of each inductee. No real problems with the people you put in. But among the people you left out, a few names seem worthy to me. Fabulous Moolah. Before everyone starts rolling their eyes, let's face it, she was women's wrestling in the United States for almost 30 years. Next, Mr. Wrestling 2. Longevity should count for something. Besides, he was the big star on TBS when it first went national. Third, Nick Gulas. I know he was disliked, but he ran a huge territory for years, gave some of the biggest stars their first breaks, and defined a style of wrestling that still has influence today through Jim Cornette. I think Farmer Burns should also be included since he trained men like Frank Gotch and Joe Stecker. Charles Oliver. Los Angeles, California. For further consideration for the Hall of Fame, Dennis James, the first great East Coast television announcer. He was instrumental in making wrestling popular in the early days of television. Also Lord Littlebrook. Surely room should be made for this small but important man. Richard Siegel. Bethpage, New York. Wino Bull Curry. Patrick Jones. Houston, Texas. Where's Gran Hamada? Mike Lorifus. Poughkeepsie, New York. I can't believe you left Wahoo Mcdaniel off the list. His drawing power, ability, and legitimate athletic credentials were at least comparable to Ernie Ladd and Bronco Nagurski. He was a headliner wherever he went, which can't be said about Wild Red Berry. He was a major influence behind the scenes in helping the early careers of Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. The fact that the guy is nearly 60 and is still working indies is further testimony to his deservedness. In closing, I noticed the Cmll television show is using the Ultimate Warrior's entrance music as their opening and closing themes. Does this mean that we'll soon be seeing Jerry McDevitt studying for the Mexican bar? Or does it just mean that Jim Hellwig is now no-showing in Tlalnepantla? Richard Sullivan. Forest City. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.